Hey, welcome back to the show. So, I wanted to talk about today the Protestant denominations, not all of them, but probably most of them, that subscribe to a particular approach called Sola Scriptura, which in Latin means only scripture or only the Bible. I think that's a dangerous approach because in doing so, they reject the writings of the early and ancient church fathers. We're talking about Ignatius, Eusebius, Augustine, all the way through St. Thomas Aquinas. So, while they take pleasure in focusing on the flower of certain scriptural statements by Jesus and others. In doing so, they ignore the bouquet or the entire garden of elaboration and meaning behind particular statements. Today, we're going to look at Matthew 17:21 and the different recensions of the Bibles. So, if you're sola scriptura, great. Only the Bible, great. Which one? Because as we'll show in this episode, the differences between Matthew 17:21 and as it relates to Mark 29:29, and the differences between the ancient scriptures and translations and the subsequent recensions. These things change a little bit and then they're footnoted. So before we begin, as always, in nomine Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, Amen. We're going to take a look at this in the different recensions. So stay tuned and I hope you enjoy. Just a quick background on the Douay-Rheims. The Douay-Rheims Bible is a direct translation of the Vulgate, written, published, translated by St. Jerome per the order of Pope Damasus I by the late 300s, early 400s, and prior to Pope Damasus' death. He went back to the original sources, the Hebrew text and the Aramaic text for the Old Testament, and to the Septuagint for the New Testament and translated everything into Latin. The Douay-Rheims is the English version of that, the Vulgate or the Vulgate. Another thing we need to take into consideration with the Douay-Rheims Bible is that when these Bibles in early and late antiquity, in the ancient times, early antiquity, and even into the medieval era, these scriptures weren't numbered. They were just translated and printed in blocks of text, some in prose and maybe some paragraphs, but generally they weren't numbered. And for some reason, Douay-Rheims is sometimes off by a number. So while we want to focus today on Matthew 17:21 and Mark 9:29, for Douay-Rheims, it's really Matthew 17:20 and Mark 9:28. Disregard that. The scriptures match up. It's not the focus of this video. What we're focusing on, what these scriptures say. Now, the background is Jesus is exorcising a demon from a child. The apostles couldn't do it. They were frustrated and asked Jesus why they couldn't do it. And he tells them two reasons. One, you lack of faith. If you had the faith of a mustard seed, you could move mountains. And two, certain demons had such power and strength and latch on to certain folks that they could only be cast out by prayer and fasting. And that's basically what Matthew 17:21 or in Douay-Rheims Matthew 17:20 says. But this kind is not cast out but by prayer and fasting. Now, as you'll see later, this is often referred to, we're referred to Mark 9:29. Now, why are we referred over to Mark 9:29 or in Douay-Rheims 9:28? Well, because scholars in their discourse in Discord often assert that Matthew 17:21 is an interpolation either by scribes who took poetic license and freedom to insert it there, or the scribes in their translation maybe misinterpreted some editor's notes in the margin that said that it's supposed to be there, it wasn't supposed to be there, and somehow it just entered in. But these are the ancient texts where these phrases exist as you see them through prayer and fasting. Um, so you'll see as we go through the different recensions that these are either omitted completely and skipped right over, or footnoted and referred to Mark 9:29, and even Mark 9:29 to where we are referred doesn't even say it in the full text. So we'll take a look at those now. So where do we go first? The King James Version, of course. Little background on King James. Directed by King James for the Protestant version of the Bible. His scholars and scribes also went back to the original source text, the Hebrew, the Aramaic for the Old Testament, as well as the Septuagint in Greek for the New Testament. So here we have Matthew 17:21. Howbeit, this kind goeth not out but by prayer and fasting. No qualms here, no misinterpretation. This isn't coming from Dewey Reams. Dewey Reams and King James both translated directly into Latin or English from the original sources. No footnote, no omissions, no referral over. But we're going to go to Mark 9:29 anyway, which reads, "And he said unto them, This kind can come forth by nothing but by prayer and fasting." Prayer and fasting. No qualms. Let's take a look at some others. The NIV, New International Version. Here we have Matthew 17:19, 17:20, 17:21 is numbered but not listed. Instead, we get a little footnote A. Some manuscripts include here words similar to Mark 9:29. Okay, so let's go to Mark 9:29 then. Mark 9:29, he replied, "This kind can come out only by prayer." Also footnoted, some manuscripts, prayer and fasting. Okay, why was it omitted or changed? Who knows? Okay, let's take a look at another one. American Standard Version, ASV. Here we have Matthew 17:19, 17:20, 17:22. 21 is completely removed. It's not numbered, skipped right over and omitted, but we get a little footnote here, C. The footnote reads, many authorities, some ancient, keyword ancient, insert verse 21, quote, but this kind goeth not out save by prayer and fasting. See Mark 9:29. Okay, Mark 9:29 ASV, also footnoted. Mark 9:29. And he said unto them, This kind can come out by nothing save by prayer. Footnoted. Footnote reads, many ancient authorities add, quote, with fasting. All right, so if they're ancient sources that say these things, why was it omitted or removed? Why does it even need to be footnoted? Let's continue with some others. The ESV. While 21 is omitted completely, we get a little footnote at the end of Matthew 17:20, and the footnote reads, some manuscripts insert verse 21, quote, but this kind never comes out except by prayer and fasting. No referral to Mark 29, but we know we should go there, so we're gonna. And we go over to Mark 29 in the ESV, and it reads, and he said to them, this cannot be driven out by anything but prayer. Footnote, some manuscripts add, and fasting. Let's go to one more. The newly revised Standard Catholic Version. Did you think I was going to leave the modern Catholics out of this argument? Absolutely not. No Matthew 17:21. It goes from 20 to 22, but they're courteous enough to give us a little footnote G, which reads, other ancient authorities add verse 21. But, quote, but this kind does not come out except by prayer and fasting. No reference to 9:29, but let's go there anyway. It's listed, quote, he said to them, this kind cannot come out only through prayer. Footnoted, other ancient authorities add, and fasting. Again, even the Catholics, the modern Catholic versions, standard revised versions of the Bible, omit ancient scripture. Let's take a look at what some of the scholars that I could find have to say about this as far as their explanation. Some scholars assert that the earliest manuscripts do not have Matthew 17:21. Okay, so what's earlier than ancient, as we reviewed and as footnoted and referenced in some of the recensions that we already took a look at? They go on to say this verse was clearly added in the 7th century. The verse under discussion here traditionally reads in older English translations, howbeit this goeth not out but by prayer and fasting. That's King James. And also referral to 929. The verse presents through the Latin tradition. It's found in the vast majority of Latin manuscripts, as well as both early and late. The verse is found in some important early Greek codices. It's also found in Origen of Alexandria's commentary on Matthew, which dates back to the 3rd century, in Chrysostom's homilies in the late 4th century, Augustine in the early 5th century, and several other late Latin fathers likewise cite the verse as occurring in Matthew. Okay, so very early and ancient texts and recensions. Confusion amok. I don't know if there is, if this is a diabolic attack on fasting, but Jesus clearly states throughout the New Testament the importance of fasting as a sacrifice, as a mortification, and as part of a daily, not a daily devotion, but definitely to be incorporated in your prayers and sacrifices. So the point here is that Sola Scriptura, great. Which version? Many are going to relate to the King James, but I've been to many Protestant parishes that have a variety of different Bibles. And as you've seen here, just a simple one or two scriptural example, things differ, things are omitted, skipped over, deferred over to another piece of scripture, and then some, brainiacs get involved and start talking about ancient codices where it's there or it's not there. The point here is you can't rely on just the Bible. You have to go to the early ancient fathers, their texts, and the entire garden of explanation. So, all in all, this may seem insignificant, but it really isn't. The sola scriptura argument. Catholics are scrutinized because we read the ancient and early fathers who are elaborating on the scripture and helping us to understand um, the full meaning, the full context, the full garden of the beautiful and moral messages. It, it goes to the bigger picture of, which Bible did he use? The Catholic Bibles have 72 to 74 books. The Ethiopic versions have up into the 80s. The Protestant Bibles, including the King James, has 66. This may seem insignificant because one line, or it's kept out or omitted completely, or it's footnoted, so it's still there, but as a note. This is just one simple example of many, many uh, scriptural differences between the different recensions. So again, the question goes to, if it's sola scriptura, only the Bible, which Bible are you talking about? It's a question to be pondered. I intend to do some additional videos with some other scriptures, such as Isaiah 14, 12. That's pretty significant in the differences of the translation. So take a look for yourselves. I invite you to do your research and study scripture and look at the difference between the different recensions and the different versions. Until next time.